The night the truck slammed into their car, paramedics pulled two men from the wreckage, one screaming, one utterly silent. Grant didn't hesitate. He tore through the broken glass, past the man he had loved for 15 years, and carried his first love out first, without a single glance back. Eli made no sound at all, not because he was fine, but because the crushed frame had stolen the air from his lungs, and no one thought to check. In the weeks that followed, something in him went quiet in a different way, a stillness with nothing left to fight for. What exactly did Grant see in that single instant that made the choice come so effortlessly to him? Settle in and let us walk you through the story of Eli Sanders, the man who quietly went blind for a week and never told the person he'd loved for 15 years, because some part of him already knew he wouldn't come. If you've ever loved someone who only showed up once it stopped costing them anything, tell us about it in the comments below. Grant never noticed the exact day I started pulling away. In 15 years, he never once noticed a small thing about me until it inconvenienced him first. So I suppose it makes a strange kind of sense that the biggest change of my life happened right under his nose, and he mistook it for nothing more than a mood. It started the night he carried Julian out of the wreck first and left me pinned behind, listening to the sirens get closer through a windshield cracked into a spiderweb. Funny thing about almost dying, it clears a lot out of you. Not immediately. It took weeks. But somewhere between the ceiling tiles of the ICU and the plastic hospital bracelet around my own wrist, something in my chest simply stopped. Stopped waiting, stopped hoping he'd notice. I like to imagine it as a switch flipping. Clean, final, dramatic. But honestly, it was quieter than that. More like a candle running out of wax. One day I looked up and the flame just wasn't there anymore, and I couldn't tell you which day, exactly, it had gone out. For most of my adult life, I built my entire calendar around a man who didn't know my coffee order changed 2 years ago. I used to think that was romantic. The idea that love meant orbiting someone so completely that your own gravity stopped mattering. I know better now. I know it the way you know a scar is a scar, not because it still hurts, but because you remember, distantly, that it once did. I stopped texting him every hour like it was oxygen. I stopped lying awake at night, tracking his location on an app he didn't know I'd kept installed for years. A small, humiliating little secret I'd never once admitted out loud, not even to myself until it was already gone. When he spent 3 nights straight at Julian's place because Lily had a fever, I said nothing. And for once, I actually meant the silence, instead of just wearing it like a costume until I couldn't stand my own performance anymore. And when I went blind for a full week and didn't call him, not once, not even by accident, that was the moment I finally understood the switch hadn't just flipped. It had been off for a while. I'd just been too scared to check. People love to ask later, when exactly they knew. I never have a clean answer for that, and I've stopped pretending I do. Love doesn't die on a single date you can circle on a calendar. It erodes. It goes missing in 1,000 tiny withdrawals. An unanswered text here, a canceled dinner there, a hand that used to reach for yours in the dark, and at some point you never noticed, simply stopped. By the time you finally clock the absence, the account's already been empty for months. You're just the last one to get the notification. You're all set, Mr. Sanders. The nurse slid a small paper bag across the counter, her voice bright with the practiced cheer of someone who says the same line 40 times a shift. Drops every 8 hours. Give it anywhere from a week to 10 days, and your vision should be fully back. I took the bag home with something close to relief, and something else underneath it I didn't have a name for yet. To understand how I ended up in that hospital, blind and calm, and strangely at peace with it, you have to go back a little further, to a stray dog, a motorcycle, and a coffee table that didn't survive the night. A month before all of this, the car crash happened. The real one, the one that changed everything, though I didn't know it yet in the moment it was happening. That crash left me with a limp for 2 weeks, and a car that would never drive again. I'll get to it. It matters more than anything else in this story, but the blindness itself didn't start there. It started smaller, almost absurdly small, the way most disasters do. I'd stepped off the curb to shoo a stray dog out of traffic and clipped a motorcycle mirror I never saw coming. It had nothing to do with the crash from a month earlier, just its own stupid little accident, born of nothing but bad timing and a dog too dumb to know it was about to get hit. The dog, for what it's worth, made it out fine, trotting off into an alley without so much as a backward glance, blissfully unaware it had nearly cost someone their eyesight on its behalf. I walked away from that one with bruised ribs and a scraped palm, nothing I thought was worth mentioning to anyone. I didn't even tell Grant about it, and it didn't occur to me until much later how strange that was, that I'd stopped reporting my own small disasters to the person who was supposed to be the first to hear about them. Or so I believed, right up until I stepped out of the shower that night, and the bathroom simply went black. Not blurry, not dim, black, total and instant, like someone had reached over and switched off the entire world. I panicked, of course I panicked. There's a particular kind of animal fear that comes from losing a sense you've never once had to think about, a fear with no shape and no direction, just your own heartbeat roaring in your ears, while the rest of the world refuses to come back. I grabbed blindly for the towel rack, missed, and put my hip straight through the coffee table instead. Glass everywhere. I could hear it skittering across the hardwood in a dozen directions, tiny and glittering, and, for all I knew, invisible forever now. For one long, terrible moment, I genuinely believed this was permanent, that whatever I'd been staring at right before the lights went out, my own reflection, half fogged from the shower, unremarkable in every way, was the last thing I'd ever see. I remember thinking absurdly that I hadn't even looked at it properly. I hadn't studied my own face the way you'd study something you knew you were about to lose. I'd just glanced at it, the way you glance at anything you assume will still be there tomorrow. I lay on my own living room floor for what felt like an hour, cataloging every small cut on my hands by feel, before I finally found my phone wedged under the couch. My fingers were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the screen by touch alone, guessing at the pattern I'd drawn 1,000 times without ever once looking at it. And here's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it. I almost called Grant first. 15 years of habit doesn't switch off just because the feeling underneath it already had. My thumb actually hovered over his name in my contacts for a full 3 seconds, long enough to picture, with startling clarity, exactly how the call would go, the clipped hello, the background noise of a nurse's station, the apology that would arrive 2 hours too late if it arrived at all. Then I remembered, he doesn't pick up during his shift, hasn't in years. And if I'm being honest with myself, some small, tired part of me simply didn't want to hear his voicemail greeting right then. On a night I was bleeding on my own living room floor, glass ground into the fibers of the rug beneath me like tiny stars I'd never get to see. So I called 911 instead. And somehow that felt like the first genuinely selfish decision I'd made in a decade. The first time in 15 years I'd reached for help without first calculating what it would cost him to give it. The ear doctor called it stress-induced temporary vision loss, the body's way of shutting a door it can no longer stand to look through. A week, she said, maybe less, if I rested and didn't strain my eyes trying to force them to work. Before I was discharged, the hospital's care coordinator handed me a card for a home health aid service they partnered with, exactly for situations like mine. Patients who needed a hand for a few days but didn't have family close by. I remember almost laughing at that phrase. I had a partner of 15 years 2 miles away, and somehow I still qualified. That's how Noah ended up on my doorstep the next morning, unfairly cheerful for 8 a.m., ready to walk me through my own apartment, like it was a place I'd never set foot in before. I remember feeling almost embarrassed by how relieved I was that the blindness wasn't permanent, and then almost immediately humbled by how hard temporary turned out to be in practice. There's no dignified way to learn a home you've lived in for 3 years all over again, one outstretched hand at a time. Noah never once made me feel foolish for it, though. He had this habit of narrating small things without being asked. Counters on your left, about 2 steps. There's a step down into the kitchen, small one, delivered so casually it took me 2 full days to realize how deliberate it actually was. Nobody had spoken to me that carefully, that consistently, in longer than I wanted to admit. I learned my apartment by touch that week. The exact number of steps from the couch to the kitchen counter, 11 if I kept my stride even. The specific texture of the hallway rug versus the living room one nubby and low pile, the other soft enough that my socks caught on it if I moved too fast. The precise angle you had to approach the bathroom door frame at to keep from clipping your shoulder on it. Noah swept up the last of the shattered coffee table glass that first morning, hauled the broken frame down to the building's dumpster himself without being asked. and set a low wooden ottoman in its place so I'd still have somewhere within reach to set my water glass and my medication. I never got around to buying a real replacement. I doubt I ever would have, even with my eyes back. I memorized the particular hum of the refrigerator, the way the radiator by the window ticked when it kicked on, the exact creak of the third floorboard from the bedroom door. Sounds that had always been there, I realized, just drowned out for years under the noise of waiting for Grant's key in the lock. I collected new bruises daily, like a tax I hadn't budgeted for. Somewhere around day 4, I stopped apologizing to the furniture I bumped into and started laughing quietly instead, which probably should have worried me more than it did. Noah asked me once, gently, whether I wanted him to call someone, a friend, family, anyone who might want to know I was going through this. I told him there wasn't anyone to call. It wasn't self-pity when I said it. It was just accounting. 15 years with Grant had quietly pruned every other branch of my life down to almost nothing, and I hadn't noticed the garden going bare until I was standing in the middle of it, blind, counting my own footsteps to the kitchen. 3 more days. That's all that stood between me and getting my eyes back. "Mr. Sanders, want me to call you a cab?" Noah had a steady hand under my elbow, the way he always did, patient in a way that had nothing performative in it. In 7 days, he'd never once made me feel like a burden, which was such a foreign sensation that I almost didn't know how to hold it. "I think I'm out of water at home," I said. "Could we swing by the store first? Milk, some bread, a few bottles." I never got to finish the sentence. A voice cut through the hospital lobby that I would have recognized in a hurricane. "Eli? What are you doing here?" I turned toward it out of pure reflex, though of course there was nothing to see. But if Julian's voice was echoing off these particular tile floors, Grant wasn't going to be far behind him. Sure enough, a beat later. "I told you I already ate in the cafeteria. Why do you keep showing up here with food? This is my job, Julian. Can you give me some room? Every single day it's something. Lunch, some errand, some excuse to check up on me. I genuinely don't have the bandwidth for this today." My fingers tightened around the lunch bag Noah had actually packed, not me. And I felt an old familiar urge climb up my throat, the urge to explain, to correct him, to fix the misunderstanding before it could calcify into fact. I wanted so badly to say it out loud. "Grant, I haven't cooked you a meal or texted you first in months. I've been quietly, deliberately trying to disappear from your life, and it's been working better than I ever expected it to. But I knew exactly how that would land. 15 years of chasing him meant nobody, least of all Grant, would ever believe I'd actually stopped. He'd hear it as manipulation. He'd hear it as a new tactic. So I let the misunderstanding stand, because for once, correcting him mattered less to me than it used to. "Okay," I said, quiet, and left it there. I didn't even feel the urge to explain further, which surprised me more than the argument itself did. I heard Julian smack Grant's arm lightly, a familiar, easy gesture that told me exactly how comfortable he still was around him. "Grant, that's harsh." Then softer, angled toward me. "Sorry about that, Eli. Lily's been running a fever for days, and Grant's been staying over to help. Don't worry, I'm just borrowing him for a little while. You'll get him back when she's better." There was an edge of amusement threaded under the apology that I didn't particularly care for. A lightness that suggested he found the whole situation a little funny. The way you find a jealous ex something funny, when you already know you've won. "You really don't need to check up on us, Eli. There's nothing going on between us." Before he could finish, Grant cut in, impatient in that specific way he got when he wanted to be somewhere else. "Why are you explaining yourself to him? Let's go get Lily's prescription filled. Her fever broke, but it's still flu season. We need to be careful." I listened to their footsteps fade down the corridor and let my grip on the lunch bag finally loosen, one finger at a time. "Who was that?" Noah asked, careful, the way he asked most things around me those days. I smiled, easy, practiced. The smile I'd perfected over a decade of pretending things didn't cost me anything. Nobody who matters anymore. Noah didn't push, which I appreciated more than I let on. He simply guided me toward the exit, one hand steady under my elbow, and let the silence sit between us the rest of the way to the car. It was strange, I remember thinking. How much more comfortable I felt in that silence, with a man I'd known for exactly a week, than I'd felt in 15 years of silences with Grant. Noah's quiet asked nothing of me. Grant's quiet had always felt like a test I was, somehow, mysteriously, still failing. "You don't have to tell me anything. Noah said eventually, once we were both buckled into the car, the engine idling in the hospital garage. I just want you to know, whatever that was back there, you didn't do anything wrong. I could hear it in your voice. You went quiet like someone bracing for a hit, not someone who'd actually earned one. I didn't answer right away. Nobody had said anything like that to me in longer than I could remember. Not an accusation, not a correction, not a gentle suggestion that I was overreacting. Just a simple, unearned kindness, offered with no strings attached to it. Thank you, I said finally, and meant it more than the 2 words probably let on. I didn't tell Noah the rest of it that day. Not the full weight of who Grant was to me, not yet. That came later, in pieces, the way most true things do. But I remember sitting in the passenger seat of his car, sunglasses back on despite the overcast sky, and feeling something shift quietly into place. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't performing calm. I actually felt it. Grant and I go back to grade school. He was the golden boy of our year, the kind of person teachers bragged about at parent conferences and other kids quietly resented. Tall even at 10 years old, effortlessly good at whatever sport was in season, the kid every group project silently organized itself around. I was not that kid. I was the one who sat 2 rows back, who noticed things nobody asked me to notice, who somehow ended up being the person Grant borrowed a pencil from on the first day of 5th grade and never quite gave back. I attached myself to him early and never really let go. Followed him through his mother's illness, through the funeral, through every version of himself he tried on afterward. The version that got too loud in high school to cover for how much he was hurting, the version that went quiet and unreachable for a whole summer, the version that finally, slowly, came back to something like steady. I was there for all of it, every draft of him, long before anyone called it love. I just called it being needed. And being needed felt at the time close enough. I think it was the sticking around that finally got his attention. He's the one who asked, eventually, the summer after we graduated, standing awkwardly outside a movie theater like it had cost him something to say it out loud. I remember feeling like I'd won some lottery nobody else had even entered, like all those years of quietly organizing my life around his had finally, retroactively, been worth it. For years after that, I sent him everything I saw that reminded me of him. A stray cat on the sidewalk, a good bowl of noodles, clouds shaped like something ridiculous. He rarely replied, and I told myself that was simply who he was, that some people express love in silence instead of words, that I shouldn't need constant proof to know something was real. Early on, at least, he used to respond to most of it, even if only briefly, a thumbs up, a haha, sometimes even a real sentence. I used to save those ones. I'm not proud of that, but I did. Then Julian came back to the city with his daughter after his divorce, and it just stopped. All of it. Grant started spending every spare hour with Lily instead. Eventually, he became her godfather, which I found out secondhand, at a dinner, from someone who assumed I already knew. I remember smiling and nodding along, asking polite follow-up questions about the ceremony, like a man discussing someone else's family, while some small, humiliated part of me did the math on how long ago the conversation about it must have happened, and how thoroughly I hadn't been part of it. At first, I thought Julian was simply an old classmate, but the way Grant worried about him went way past that. The way his phone lit up at odd hours, the way his voice dropped half a register whenever Julian's name came up, the way he started remembering details about Julian's life with a precision he never once managed for mine. So eventually, I did some digging, the way you do when you already suspect the answer and just need it confirmed. Turned out they'd been the couple everyone in their year expected to end up together. The 2 golden kids, inevitable, the kind of pairing yearbooks quietly root for, until Julian left the country for reasons nobody ever fully explained to me. Some said a scholarship abroad. Someone else told me, years later, it was closer to a falling out neither of them ever really recovered from. I never got the true version, and by the time I might have asked for it, I'd stopped wanting to know. Grant ended up with me instead, and for a long time I told myself that meant something. That I'd been chosen over some idealized version of a person who wasn't even in the country anymore, who existed for Grant mostly as an old photograph and an unfinished sentence. I built a strange kind of comfort out of that absence. Julian was gone, so Julian couldn't compete, so I didn't have to. I was wrong, obviously. Absence isn't the same as gone. Sometimes it's just a pause button, waiting for someone to press play again. When I found out the full history, we had a real fight, one of maybe three, in all those years that actually left a mark. I said things I meant and things I didn't, the way you do when fear finally finds its voice after years of staying quiet. I even went to Julian myself, before he and Grant had reconnected in earnest, and told him to keep his distance from Grant. I'll never forget the look on his face after that. Cold, almost like he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. Like the version of me capable of drawing a line in the sand was someone he found genuinely distasteful. Grant told me if I ever spoke to Julian that way again, we were finished. Just like that. No negotiation, no room to explain myself, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I'd had a reason to be afraid. We didn't speak for 3 months after that, the longest silence of our entire relationship. 3 months where I relearned what it was like to eat dinner alone and not check my phone every 5 minutes, and hated every second of the practice. Eventually, I couldn't stand the silence more than I could stand my own pride, so I apologized first, the way I always did, the way I'd apologized first for the better part of 15 years, regardless of who had actually done the damage. He promised he'd keep his distance from Julian going forward, and he kept that promise, more or less, right up until about a month ago. "What happened a month ago?" Noah asked, and I heard the genuine curiosity in it, not the polite kind people use while just waiting for their turn to talk. He'd been driving me to work when Julian called, said Lily had a fever and he couldn't get a cab in time. Grant turned the car around without even glancing at me first, like the decision had already been made before Julian finished the sentence. On the way there, a truck rear-ended us at a red light. We were both hurt. Julian hit his chin on the dash. My foot got trapped under the frame when it buckled inward. When the paramedics finally arrived, Grant carried Julian out first. He didn't look back at me once. Not when they cut the door off. Not when they lifted me onto the stretcher. Not once. That's when I knew, really knew, that it was over. Everything after that was just paperwork. Noah helped me carry the groceries in, worried the entire ride about how I'd manage alone for the evening. He offered, twice, to stay a little longer than his shift technically required, and I turned him down both times, mostly because I didn't want to explain why the idea of being alone that night sounded, for the first time in a week, like something I actually wanted. I showered carefully, feeling my way along the wall the way I'd learned to, and settled onto the couch with something close to actual peace settling into my chest. The particular, hard-won quiet of an apartment with nobody in it who expected anything from me. I ran through the numbers in my head the way I'd started doing every night since the hospital, quietly, like a kind of prayer. 3 days of food stocked. My new job didn't start for another 5. My flight, originally scheduled for tomorrow, I'd need to push back 3 days to match my recovery. I'd already called the airline that morning from the hospital bed, my voice flat and businesslike, like I was rescheduling a dentist appointment instead of the exit from the only life I'd ever built. The woman on the phone had no idea she was talking to someone dismantling 15 years in a single 10-minute call, and there was something almost funny about that, in a bleak sort of way, how ordinary the ending of something enormous can sound from the outside. I was reaching for a slice of bread when I heard the front door open. I assumed it was Grant, stopping by again uninvited the way he'd started doing, and stood too quickly, bracing myself for another argument I didn't have the energy for. Instead, I was knocked sideways by something small and fast that collided with my knees. A child's cry split the quiet apartment, sudden and high, and before I could even process what had happened, someone shoved me hard out of the way with enough force that I stumbled into the side table, my hip catching the corner of it in almost the exact same spot the old coffee table had bruised me a week earlier, before it ended up in a dumpster and left an ottoman standing in its place. The pain of it barely registered. What registered was the sound, Lily's crying, high and startled and real, and underneath it, the unmistakable rustle of Julian dropping to his knees to gather her up. "Ellie, what is wrong with you?" Julian's voice, tight with a fury I'd never heard directed at me before, laced through with real tears. "I know you don't like us, but if you have a problem, take it out on me." "How could you push my daughter?" I opened my mouth, and nothing came out fast enough. There is a particular kind of helplessness in being accused of something you didn't do, while also being physically incapable of proving it. No gesture I could make, no direction I could look. that would read as anything other than guilt to two people who had no idea I couldn't see either of them at all. Before I could even begin to explain that I couldn't see anyone at all, a hand closed around my arm, gripping harder than it needed to. What were you even doing standing there in the dark? Couldn't you tell Lily was coming? She's a child, Eli. You're a grown man. When exactly are you going to grow up? Let go. My voice came out flat, stripped of the old frantic edge Grant was used to hearing from me whenever he raised his own. His hand tightened around my arm for a second, surprise, I think, before he slowly released me, like he was testing whether I'd flinch. The living room went quiet, except for Lily's fading sniffles and Julian's low, rhythmic murmuring as he comforted her. Eli, what is wrong with you? Grant said again, quieter now. The anger sanded down into something closer to irritation. Why are you standing here in the dark anyway? Why didn't you turn on a light? And why are you wearing sunglasses inside the apartment? Don't be so hard on him, Julian said, his voice gentling in a way that grated against something raw in me. I'm sure he didn't mean to bump into her. We should have called first, honestly, but Lily wouldn't stop asking for her godfather, and Grant said we could swing by quickly for a few of his things. I stood perfectly still, sunglasses hiding whatever my eyes were or weren't doing, tracking every one of them by sound alone, a skill I hadn't asked for and would probably never fully lose. Grant was directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell the cedar and clove aftershave he'd worn for as long as I'd known him. Julian and Lily were a few feet off to his right, near the shoe rack by the door, given away by the slight scuff of small sneakers against tile. I told you to let go. Now I'm telling you both to leave. This is my apartment. My name is on the lease. You do not have the right to bring guests here without asking me first. A sharp intake of breath from his direction. Your apartment? We've lived here together for 3 years, Eli. Half of what's in this place is mine. The furniture, half the kitchen, God, even the plants. What is this? Ever since the accident, you've turned into someone I barely recognize. If you're still upset that I saved Julian first, just say it plainly instead of taking it out on a 5-year-old. I almost laughed, and the almost law surprised me more than anything else that night. He genuinely believed my silence was some kind of long game, that I was punishing him deliberately, playing hard to get, holding out for an apology or a grand gesture that would let us go back to exactly how things used to be. I'm not throwing a tantrum, Grant, I said, reaching behind me until my fingers found the smooth edge of the console table and anchored there. I don't particularly care who you save in an emergency. Save whoever you want, whenever you want. Right now, I just need you both to leave my home. Look at me when I'm talking to you. He was closer now. I could hear it in the shift of his breathing. Take off the sunglasses. Why are you acting so bizarre about all of this? Maybe we should just go, Julian said, his voice suddenly unsure, tightening around some new nervousness he hadn't had a second ago. Lily's tired. We can always come back another. No, we're not going anywhere until he explains what this is about. I felt Grant's fingers close around the frame of my sunglasses and pull them off my face in one motion. The cool air of the apartment hit my open eyes directly for the first time in front of him. I didn't blink. I couldn't focus on his face. There was nothing to focus on, just shapeless dark and the vague warmth of a body standing where his voice was coming from. But I kept my gaze fixed roughly toward the sound of him anyway, out of some old, stubborn instinct. Dead silence swallowed the room whole. Eli? All the anger had drained out of his voice in an instant, replaced with something sharper and far more frightened. Why aren't you looking at me? Daddy? Lily mumbled into Julian's shoulder, small and confused. Uncle Eli's eyes look funny. They're not moving right. Look at my hand, Eli. I heard the rustle of his sleeve as he waved it somewhere in front of my face, testing. I kept my vacant gaze fixed on the space where I judged his chest to be. I can't see your hand, Grant? What do you mean you can't see? He stepped closer. His breathing gone suddenly shallow and quick. Stop it. Stop whatever this is. Is this another way to keep me here? To make me feel guilty? The medicine's on the ottoman by the couch, I said, pointing vaguely in what I hoped was the right direction. There's a paper bag from the hospital pharmacy. If you're capable of reading, you'll understand what's wrong. Now, please, both of you, leave. I heard his quick, heavy footsteps cross the room, the crinkle of paper, the small, glassy clink of a pill bottle being lifted and set back down, then a long, suffocating stretch of nothing, long enough that I actually wondered for a moment whether he'd simply walked out without another word, whether even this, finally, would fail to hold his attention for more than a few seconds. Stress-induced temporary vision loss, he read aloud, barely above a whisper, the words catching in his throat like they'd cost him something physical. Drops every 8 hours. Patient, Eli Sanders. There was something almost unbearable in hearing my own diagnosis read back to me in his voice. A doctor's voice, trained to stay level through news far worse than this, and still it cracked on my name. I heard the bag slip from his fingers and land softly against the carpet. When did this happen? A week ago. The night of the storm. You called me that night. His voice cracked clean down the middle. I didn't pick up. I was in the emergency room, then admitted overnight. I didn't want to bother you. You were busy taking care of Lily. You went blind and you didn't tell me? He was in front of me again, both hands landing on my shoulders, gripping harder than he probably realized. I'm supposed to be the one who's there for you, Eli. His touch didn't feel like anything anymore. It used to feel like coming home. I could remember, almost academically, the version of myself who would have leaned into those hands, grateful for the weight of them, mistaking urgency for love. Now it just felt like weight, an unnecessary pressure I wanted off my shoulders as quickly as possible, the same way you want a coat off in a room that's suddenly gone too warm. I pried his hands off, gently but with a firmness that surprised even me. Finger by finger, the way you'd remove something that had simply overstayed its welcome. I left you in a crushed car to get to Julian, I said, my voice as calm and level as still water. You never looked back, not once, the entire time they were cutting me out. If my life didn't matter enough to you in that moment, why exactly would my eyesight matter to you now? That was different. His voice climbed, edged with real panic now. He was screaming. He was bleeding from his face. You weren't making any noise. I thought that meant you were fine, I thought. I wasn't making a sound because the dashboard had collapsed against my chest, and my foot was pinned under the frame of the door. I couldn't breathe, Grant. I watched you carry him away through a windshield full of cracks, and in that exact moment, something in me finally understood what 15 years hadn't let me see. I've spent a decade and a half chasing a man who would leave me to die if his first love so much as flinched. I'm not angry at you anymore if that's what you're waiting for. I just woke up. That's all this is. Eli, Julian's voice, small now, drifting in from the doorway. I didn't know any of that. I swear, if I'd known, I never would have asked him to stay with us. We'll go. I'll take Lily home right now. Please do, I said, not bothering to turn toward his voice, and take him with you. I'm not going anywhere. Grant snapped immediately. Julian, take a cab. I'm staying here. He can't even see straight. Someone needs to. I don't need your help, I said, cutting him off before the sentence could finish forming. I have Noah. He got me home safely today, and he'll be back again tomorrow. I've managed 7 days without you already. I can manage 3 more. Noah? Who's that? Some stranger you'd rather trust than me? A stranger doesn't leave me trapped in a crushed car. A stranger doesn't call me a liar the moment I tell him I can't see. Leave, Grant, or I will call building security. And if that doesn't work, he stood frozen in place. I could hear the small sounds of his fists clenching at his sides, his breath gone ragged and uneven. For the first time in the entire length of our relationship, he had absolutely nothing to say in his own defense. Let's go, Julian said quietly, all the earlier performance stripped completely from his voice. Let's give him some space, Grant. This time, he didn't argue. I listened to his slow, heavy steps follow Julian out, the door clicking shut behind them, the lock turning over. I stood in the dark for a long time afterward, feeling the tension that had lived in my shoulders for a full week finally begin, slowly to loosen. The way a fist unclenches only once it realizes the fight is actually over. Not just paused, I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't cried, hadn't begged him to understand, hadn't done a single one of the things 15 years of habit had trained me to do the moment his tone turned sharp. I stood there, blind, in an apartment I was already halfway out of, and realized that the silence I'd been so afraid of for so long didn't actually hurt at all. It just felt like mine. I made my way to the couch, one hand trailing along the wall for guidance, ate my bread in small, deliberate bites, and took my medication with a sip of water that had long since gone lukewarm. 3 days left. 3 days until the darkness lifted for good, and 3 days until I left this city behind entirely. The doorbell woke me the next morning before my alarm did. I didn't move. I already knew exactly who it was. The way you know a storm is coming from the particular color the sky turns, long before the first drop falls. I lay there a moment longer than I needed to, cataloging the fact that some old, exhausted part of me still expected to feel dread at the sound of that bell, and finding, instead, only a mild, distant irritation, the kind you feel at a car alarm 3 streets over. 3 rings, a pause, then more, faster, more urgent. My phone buzzed against the couch cushion beside me, and the text-to-speech assistant read the message aloud in its flat electronic monotone. "Eli, please open the door. I brought breakfast from the bakery you like on Halsted. Some fresh fruit and water, too. Please, just let me in." I turned the phone face down against the cushion. A few minutes later, I heard the distinct scrape of a key turning in the lock, and something in my stomach dropped, even though I'd already known it was coming. "Eli?" His voice was careful, almost timid, nothing like the tone he'd used the night before. He closed the door behind himself, and I heard his footsteps move into the living room. "Eli, I know you're upset with me, but you need to eat something. I got the blueberry scones you like." "How did you get in here, Grant?" I still have my key. I never actually gave it back. Put the key on the kitchen counter and leave. I'm having the locks changed tomorrow morning, first thing." "Please don't do this," he said, his footsteps coming closer, the plastic rustle of grocery bags as he set them down on the table. "I stayed up the entire night thinking about everything you said yesterday. I know I've been neglectful. I know I haven't been the partner you deserve for a long time now. But 15 years, Eli. You can't just throw 15 years of history over one mistake. It wasn't a single mistake. It was a choice. And it wasn't just one choice, either. It was a whole series of them, every single day, ever since Julian came back into the picture. I was only trying to help him." His voice took on a pleading, desperate edge I hadn't heard from him in years. "He's a single father. He had no one else in this city. His ex-wife was abusive to him, and I felt responsible, because of everything we used to be to each other." "You mean because you almost dated in college and never actually did," I said flatly. "You told me that yourself, Grant, back when you still told me things. Nothing happened between you and Julian. That's not what this is about, and you know it. What did you feel about your present, Grant? What about me?" I let a little heat creep into my voice for the first time since he'd walked in. "I'd send you a photo of some cloud shaped like a cat and get nothing back. I told you I made partner at work, and you said, 'That's nice,' and immediately started talking about Lily's kindergarten applications. I planned an entire anniversary dinner last year, cooked for 6 hours, and you texted me at 8:40 that you were staying late with Julian because Lily wouldn't settle down without him there. I ate that dinner alone at the table, both plates set, and told myself it was fine, because that's what 15 years of practice teaches you to do. I became a ghost in my own apartment, Grant. I existed to keep your dinner warm and your laundry folded, and that was more or less the extent of it. You didn't fall out of love with me in one dramatic moment. You just slowly stopped noticing I was in the room, until eventually I stopped being in it, even when I was standing right in front of you." He didn't answer right away. I heard him sink slowly into the armchair across from me, the old leather creaking under his weight the way it always did. A sound so familiar it used to comfort me, back when I still thought familiarity and love were the same thing. "I didn't realize," he said finally, quiet. "You never really complained." "I did complain. Constantly, actually. Do you even remember the 3 months we didn't speak? After I confronted him directly? You told me if I ever spoke to him that way again, we were done. No discussion. No room for it. You chose his comfort over my peace of mind that day, and every day after that I learned to read the room a little better. So I stopped complaining. I realized fighting for space just made me look unstable in your eyes. Silence became the only dignity I had left to hold on to. "That's not fair," he said, and for the first time I heard something almost like his old voice again, the confident one, the one that had never once in his life expected to lose an argument. "You make it sound like I chose him over you on purpose every single time. It wasn't like that. It was never that calculated." "I know it wasn't calculated," I said. "That's what makes it worse, Grant. If you'd sat down and decided, deliberately, to choose him over me, at least I could hate you cleanly for it. But you didn't decide anything. You just drifted, every single day, toward whichever direction required the least effort from you, and it turned out that direction was never mine. I wasn't a decision you made against. I just wasn't a decision you ever had to make at all." A soft, choked sound came from his direction. He was crying. I could hear the particular hitch in his breathing that always preceded it. There had been a time, not so long ago, when Grant crying would have completely undone me, sent me straight to my knees in front of him, apologizing for causing pain I hadn't even caused. I would have taken on the blame for anything, everything, just to make that sound stop now. Listening to it, I felt something closer to nothing at all. It landed on me like rain lands on a closed window, present, audible, but with absolutely no weight behind it. Nothing that touched what was actually inside the room with me. "I'm sorry, Eli." He choked the words out, voice thick and wet with tears. "I'm so sorry. Please, just let me make this right. Let me stay and take care of you until your eyes are fully better. I've already taken a leave of absence from the hospital. 2 weeks. I'll cook, I'll clean, I'll drive you to every single appointment. Whatever you need from me. I don't want you here, Grant." My voice stayed level, even as something in my chest ached faintly at how easy the words came out. "Your presence doesn't comfort me anymore. It just reminds me of everything I've already lost. If you genuinely want to do something for me, leave. Let me have whatever's left of these last few days in peace." "These last few days?" He caught the phrasing immediately, his voice tightening with a new, sharper panic. "What do you mean, last few days?" "Nothing," I said, realizing too late I'd let something slip that I hadn't meant to. "I just mean until my vision comes back fully." He sat there for a long while after that, his quiet crying gradually fading into slow, heavy breathing. Eventually, I heard him stand. "I'll leave the food here," he said quietly, resigned in a way I'd never heard from him before. "But I'm not giving up on this, on us." A year ago, hearing him say those exact words would have brought me to tears of pure relief. I would have felt like the luckiest person alive, certain that all my patience had finally paid off. Hearing them now, I only felt a distant, almost clinical irony settle over me. He hadn't said any of this because he'd suddenly realized he loved me. He'd said it because his ego couldn't tolerate the fact that I had finally, quietly, stopped chasing him. He was a man who'd spent his whole life being adored without having to work for it, the fixed center of somebody else's entire universe. The moment I stepped out of his orbit, on purpose without permission, he panicked. It was never really about me. It had always been about the shape I left behind when I stopped following him. "Too late, Grant," I said softly to the closed door, knowing full well he couldn't hear it through the wood. I stood, walked into my bedroom, and shut the door behind me, letting it swallow the last sound of him in the hallway. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after that, listening to my own breathing in the dark, waiting for the grief I assumed was owed to me. 15 years doesn't end without a reckoning. That's what I'd always believed anyway. I braced for it the way you brace for a wave you can hear coming but can't yet see. It never arrived. What arrived instead was something closer to exhaustion. Clean and simple, the kind that comes after, finally setting down something heavy you'd carried. So long you forgot it had a weight at all. I slept better that night than I had in months, blind still, in a house that no longer felt like waiting for anything. The 2 days that followed passed with a quiet I almost didn't trust at first. Grant didn't come back, not that morning, not the one after it. No doorbell, no key in the lock, no messages the assistant had to read aloud to me in that flat electronic voice. Noah came each afternoon as scheduled, walked me through my last few errands, packed the boxes I couldn't see well enough to pack myself, and asked no more questions than I was willing to answer. I spent most of both days simply sitting with the silence, testing it the way you test a bruise to see if it still hurts, and finding, each time, that it didn't. Friday morning arrived bright and impossibly clear, the kind of light that felt almost mocking against everything I'd been through in the dark. My vision had returned fully overnight, no haze at the edges, no lag when I turned my head too fast. Just my own eyes, working the way they were supposed to. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, they were sharp and focused, the week of temporary blindness already fading into something that felt more like a story I'd been told than something I'd actually lived. The bruises scattered across my body had faded down to pale yellow-green ghosts, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. I dressed carefully in a simple charcoal coat, packed my 2 suitcases with the efficient, practiced motions of someone who'd clearly done this kind of packing in their head 100 times before doing it for real, and took one long, final look around the apartment. There's a particular quiet that settles over a space once you've decided to leave it. Not the ordinary quiet of an empty room, but something more deliberate, as if the apartment itself already knew and had started, politely, to let go of me first. It struck me, standing there in the doorway, how little of it actually felt like mine. 3 years of shared furniture, and I couldn't point to a single piece I'd truly chosen for myself instead of simply agreeing to. The gray sectional Grant picked out without asking. The bookshelf that held more of his medical texts than anything I'd ever wanted to read. Even the framed photos on the wall were mostly of us, or worse, of him and Julian and Lily at some birthday party I'd been too busy to attend, invited more out of habit than desire. I'd spent 3 years living inside someone else's life and calling it a home. It was already empty in every way that mattered. The boxes for donation sat neatly stacked by the door, waiting on a charity pickup truck that would arrive, sometime after I'd already left the city entirely. Someone else's problem to through, someone else's decision about what deserved to be kept. The spare key sat on the kitchen counter next to a short note that read, "Grant, the lease is terminated. Please don't look for me." I'd rewritten that note 4 times the night before, each version a little shorter than the last, until I finally landed on the version that said everything by saying almost nothing at all. There was no anger left in it to spend. Just information, delivered plainly, the way you'd leave a note for a stranger subletting your apartment. I took a slow breath and felt something in my chest lift that I hadn't expected. An immense, almost dizzying lightness, like a stone I'd been quietly carrying for 15 years, had finally, without ceremony, been set down. I opened the front door, pulling my suitcases behind me, and nearly walked straight into a figure sitting against the wall in the hallway. It was Grant. He was wearing the same clothes he'd clearly been living in for days, his hair a disheveled mess, his eyes bloodshot and sunken from what looked like a total absence of sleep. He looked, in that moment, like a ghost of the confident golden boy I'd spent 15 years orbiting. When he saw me standing there with 2 suitcases at my feet, his eyes went wide with something close to real terror. "Ellie?" he gasped, already scrambling to his feet, taking a step toward me. What is this? Where are you going?" "I'm leaving, Grant," I said, my voice calm and steady, as I pulled the door shut behind me and locked it one final time, the click of the deadbolt sounding unusually loud in the quiet hallway. "Leaving? Leaving to go where? Is this some kind of trick?" He reached out, trying to grab for one of my suitcase handles, but I pulled it back out of his reach, keeping a clear, deliberate distance between us. "No, Grant, I'm moving. I applied for a position in Austin a month ago. My flight leaves in 3 hours." "A month ago?" His voice cracked audibly, his face draining of color right in front of me. You applied a month ago? Before the accident even?" "Yes," I said, gently but firmly. "I applied for the position a month ago. I was still holding on to some small hope that we had a future worth staying for. But when that truck hit us, and you walked away with Julian without looking back once, that's the exact moment I made my decision. I accepted the offer that same night, from my hospital bed, with one hand, because the other was still in a splint. Eli, please." He fell to his knees right there in the hallway, hands grabbing at the hem of my coat, weeping openly now, his whole body shaking with deep, uneven sobs. "Don't do this. I'll do anything. I'll leave the hospital. We can move to Austin together. We can start completely over. Just don't leave me behind." I looked down at him, and for a long moment I let myself actually feel the weight of everything. 15 years spent studying his habits, memorizing his favorite meals, learning the exact sound of his footsteps on hardwood versus carpet, spending countless nights crying myself to sleep and wondering endlessly what was wrong with me, that I still wasn't enough. I thought about the boy who lent him a pencil in 5th grade and never asked for it back. I thought about every cloud I ever photographed and sent into the silence, hoping one day it would come back to me the way it used to. I thought about the version of myself who would have given anything, absolutely anything, to see him on his knees like this, saying these exact words, meaning them or not. And now, looking down at him kneeling at my feet in an empty hallway, I felt none of it. No anger, no hatred, no satisfaction, even, which surprised me the most, because some smaller, pettier part of me had always assumed satisfaction was what the end of this would feel like, if it ever came. Instead, there was just a quiet, settled, almost peaceful indifference, like watching weather happen to somebody else's city, a storm rolling through a skyline I used to live in, no longer capable of touching me at all. "Get up, Grant," I said softly. "Don't do this to yourself. It doesn't change anything. I can't live without you, Eli. He sobbed, his forehead pressed against the toe of my shoe. I didn't realize how much you did for me, how much you actually loved me, until you stopped. Please, give me one more chance, just one. His hands found my ankles, gripping there like I might vanish if he let go, and for one strange, suspended second, I felt almost sorry for him. Not enough to change anything, but enough to notice the feeling passing through, distant and small, like watching a stranger cry on a train, and feeling a flicker of sympathy you know won't last past your stop. You had 15 years of chances, Grant, I said. You just spent all of them on somebody else. What I felt for you didn't die in a single day, Grant, I said, gently pulling my coat free from his grip, finger by finger. It died slowly, over years of being quietly neglected. The accident was just the final blow, the last domino, and you'd already knocked over everyone before it yourself. You can't rebuild something that's already turned entirely to dust. I crouched down slightly, so that we were closer to eye level, and for the first time all morning I let my voice soften, not out of hope, but out of something closer to closure, the last honest thing I had left to give him. You spent your whole life being the center of everything without ever having to fight for it, Grant. People loved you before you gave them a reason to. I loved you before you gave me one too, and I kept loving you long after the reasons stopped making sense, because I didn't know how to stop. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because I think, somewhere underneath all of it, you actually believe you did nothing wrong. And you need to know that you did. Not one thing, many, every day, for years, in ways so small you never once had to notice them, which is exactly what made them so easy to keep doing. I stood back up, my knees aching faintly from the crouch, and looked down at him one last time. I don't love you anymore. And honestly, it is the most liberating thing I have ever felt in my life. I turned away from him and started walking down the hallway toward the elevator, my suitcases trailing behind me with a small, steady rattle against the tile. He never followed, though he called my name twice, the sound echoing off the walls of the empty corridor and fading before it ever reached me. Perhaps, finally, he understood that no amount of begging was going to bring back the version of me that used to follow him around like a shadow with no shape of its own, the version who would have turned around at the sound of his voice every single time, no matter how many times it cost him nothing to call. I didn't look back, though some old, half-dead reflex in me expected to want to. It never came. I kept walking, one steady step after another, counting them the way I'd counted the 11 steps to my own kitchen counter all those blind days earlier, except this time there was nothing to bump into, nothing to memorize by touch, just a clear, straight hallway leading exactly where I meant to go. The elevator doors slid open. I'd stepped inside, turned around once, and looked at him kneeling there on the floor for the very last time, a man who had never once, in 15 years, had to learn how to lose something, learning it now, all at once, in a hallway that smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner and nothing else. I felt the doors begin to close and didn't reach out to stop them, watching him grow smaller through the narrowing gap until the doors sealed shut between us for good. The cab ride to the airport was quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Not the anxious waiting for a text kind of quiet I'd lived inside. For so long I'd mistaken it for personality, but something closer to actual stillness. The kind you only notice once it arrives, because you'd forgotten it was something a person could feel. I watched the skyline slide past the window, tall glass buildings gradually giving way to open highway and wide, pale sky, and caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years, thinking about nothing in particular. Not rehearsing an apology, not drafting an explanation for a fight that hadn't happened yet. Just watching the world go by, entirely unbothered by it. The driver asked, at one point, if I was heading somewhere fun. I told him I was starting over, and he laughed like I'd made a joke, and I let him believe that, because it was easier than explaining that I meant it literally. I thought about correcting him, about telling him the whole thing, start to finish, the way you sometimes want to tell a total stranger everything, precisely because they'll never see you again. I didn't. Some stories don't need an audience to be true. This one, I decided, could simply belong to me now, the way nothing else in my life ever fully had. At the terminal, I checked my bags, moved through security without incident, and found a seat near the enormous glass windows at my departure gate, letting myself simply breathe for the first time in what felt like weeks. I ordered a coffee from the kiosk nearby. the first thing in longer than I could remember, that I'd chosen purely because I wanted it, with no one else's preference weighed against my own, and it tasted better than it had any right to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a message from my new landlord, or maybe from Noah, checking in one last time before he disappeared from my client list entirely. It was an unsaved number. Whatever phone Grant had been using to call and text me for years must have been left behind somewhere in the last 2 days. This had to be a new one, or a borrowed one. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. It was a photo of the sky, thick white clouds catching the golden light of early morning, shaped unmistakably like a small cat curled up asleep. Underneath it, a message. "The sky is beautiful today. I remember you used to love clouds like this. I'm sorry, Eli. I'm sorry for everything." I looked at the photo for a few long seconds, feeling absolutely nothing move in my chest. There was a time, not so long ago, when a message like that would have undone me completely, when I would have stared at that sleeping cloud cat for an hour, searching it for hidden meaning, convincing myself it was proof he'd loved me all along, in his own quiet, broken way. I could feel the ghost of that old instinct pass through me, faint and distant, like a draft from a door that had long since been sealed shut. But it didn't catch. There was nothing left in me for it to catch on. Then I looked up, past my own reflection, through the massive glass windows of the terminal, at the actual sky stretching out over the runway. A brilliant, endless blue, completely and entirely free of clouds. No cats, no shapes. No hidden messages waiting to be found in the weather, the way I used to search for them for 15 years, desperate for some sign that I mattered enough to be seen. Just sky, exactly as it was, asking nothing of me and owing me nothing back. I looked back down at my phone, tapped the screen twice, deleted the message, and blocked the number without a second thought. "Now boarding flight 402 to Austin," the gate agent announced over the loudspeaker, her voice crackling slightly through the old intercom system. I gathered my things without any of the old urgency that used to live in my chest whenever I heard my name, or anything close to it, called out loud. There was nothing left to rush toward, and nothing left to run from either. Just a gate, a boarding pass, and a flight that was, for once in my life, entirely and only mine. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked toward the boarding gate without a single backward glance. I didn't need one. My vision was perfectly clear for the first time in longer than I could remember, and for the first time in my entire life, I was walking forward into a future that belonged to absolutely no one but me. Somewhere behind me, a city was waking up to the same brilliant, cloudless sky, and in it, a man was probably still sitting on the floor of an empty hallway, wondering how 15 years could disappear so completely, so quietly, without a single dramatic ending to mark the occasion. I used to think love had to end in fire to mean anything. Slammed doors, shattered glass, someone screaming in a parking lot. I know better now. Sometimes it just ends in a hallway, with a suitcase and a lock clicking shut, and the person walking away doesn't look back, not because they're punishing anyone, but because there's simply nothing left behind them worth turning around for. I thought, boarding that plane, about the boy who used to send photographs of clouds into a silence that never once sent anything back, and I felt, for the first time, something like tenderness toward him instead of pity. He wasn't foolish. He wasn't weak. He simply hadn't learned yet that love is supposed to be an exchange, not an offering laid at someone's feet and left there to rot. I like to think he'd be proud of the version of me boarding this flight, even if it took a crushed windshield and 10 days of darkness to finally get him here. Ahead of me, somewhere over Texas, was an apartment I hadn't seen yet, a job I hadn't started, and a version of myself I was only beginning to meet. I found, boarding that plane, that I was looking forward to introducing myself. If Eli's story stirred something in you, we'd love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell us about the moment you finally knew it was time to stop chasing someone who had already let go. Your stories are what keep this channel going, so if this one meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and stay close for the next one. Thank you for watching all the way through. It truly means more than you know.